Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. There's a week to go. The long overdue 2013 New York City primaries. One last week before we can forget about either Joe Lhota or John Catsimatidis. And we can forget about all but two of the Democrats, de Blasio, Quinn, Thompson, Lieu, and Weiner. No more either of Spitzer or Stringer. Joining me today to talk New York City elections and politics are two of New York's premier political wise guys, Errol Louis and Azi Paybarah. Errol Louis is the political anchor at New York One News and host of Inside City Hall, Road to City Hall. Errol was a New York Daily News columnist and member of its editorial board. He's a contributor to CNN and a colleague of mine at the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. Azi is the senior writer at Capital New York and New York's longtime premier political blogger and a frequent guest at the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. Welcome back, gents.
Good to see you.
Okay. Next Wednesday morning, or next Tuesday night, what are the headlines? What are the possible stories, Azi?
The recount continues.
Oh, no!
Sorry. I didn't mean to start on that one.
It's
very possible.
Go ahead. Elaborate a little bit.
It's possible that on election night, similar to years in the past, we will not have a clear indicator as to who are the top two Democratic candidates, assuming no one gets 40%. So who's going to be in the runoff? There's going to be Bill de Blasio, possibly Bill Thompson, maybe even Christine Quinn. But it's very possible that because the lever machines are being used, because the New York City Board of Elections has historically had problems, that we won't know definitively who's in the race. 2005, 1997 all over again, Errol?
Well, sure. 2005, it wasn't clear because there was a vote margin of 250 votes.
Right.
Out of hundreds of thousands cast. That would have maybe made Ferrer a clear winner as opposed to sort of a possible winner.
With Anthony Weiner
coming in second. And, you know, there's 6,000 machines that have to get counted. There's a very poor history of them sort of turning this thing around quickly. So, yeah, I think it's a very plausible headline. On the Republican side, I think there'll be either of two headlines. One will be, you know, money saves the day for John Catsimatidis,
right,
and an incredible come-from-behind win, or money doesn't buy elections on the Republican side of mayoral politics in New York City.
Go back to the Dems. What are some of the other headlines, other stories coming out next Wednesday morning?
There's going to be a lot of head scratching and a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking about what happened to Christine Quinn's campaign.
Go ahead.
She started the year as the best known candidate, highest profile position as city council speaker, had the tacit support of Mayor Michael Bloomberg and the real estate industry and the people who have done a lot of business with City Hall. She was their preferred candidate, and she had positioned herself as the continuity candidate. She had floated the idea of keeping Ray Kelly on as police commissioner, who is historically very popular in public opinion polls with people more than any other New York City police commissioner. And he's even more popular than the NYPD during this historically low crime era. Yet he's become problematic. He's become toxic. And then Christine Quinn's adjustment of moving from being the Bloomberg candidate to, like every other Democrat in the race, the anti-Bloomberg candidate. So her shift and her positioning herself, and I think we were talking about this before the cameras were rolling, that her decision to not embrace her identity as the history-making candidate, as the first female candidate, as the first openly gay mayor of New York City if she's elected, her decision to sort of downplay that and to really run as the Bloomberg candidate, that's going to be the decision that people talk about.
You know, because lurking behind all of this is the question of what's the mood of the city, right? Are we fearful of sliding back to the 1970s, which is a feature of, say, Joe Lhota's campaign?
Right.
Or are we sort of going confidently forward, and do we think that there's enough wiggle room that we can start talking about things like dealing with inequality, dealing with affordability issues, changing from the Bloomberg way of doing things to some other way of doing it? And that's a broad question for November. The question is now, what's the mood? The immediate question is, what is the mood of the Democratic primary electorate? You know, and that's, you know, depending on their mood, they may not turn out. If people are confused and generally okay with the way things are, and don't think that there's some big turning point that we're going to, then confusion will keep you home, satisfaction will keep you home, apathy will keep you home. Who's going to come out and why? And that's what all of the candidates are asking themselves. That's what the pollsters are asking. That's what we're all asking. And I guess we'll have a preliminary answer, at least, on Wednesday morning.
But isn't the bottom line the get out the vote operation? I mean, let's follow up on what you're saying. Turnout is key, but turning out your folks is central to winning. Who looks the strongest? Is this, in the air war versus ground war, who's got the best ground war?
Christine Quinn claims that she has 1,000 people out knocking on doors every night and has had them out there since like April or May.
But they're not getting polled, obviously.
I have never seen them. So they're not door knocking in my neighborhood. On the other hand, I'm always working, so I'm in the studio most of the day. I don't know if that's real or not. We know that because of the union support that Bill Thompson has, there will be a massive ground game by the United Federation of Teachers.
And also they've begun an independent expenditure campaign on his behalf. I think by far he is the most widely supported by independent groups.
I tell you, just anecdotally, I've gotten maybe a dozen pieces of mail supporting Bill Thompson. At least 9 or 10 of them came from the United Federation of Teachers.
Okay, so go ahead.
But I think Errol makes a great point that what's motivating people is this idea of either we need to change direction or we need to continue. And if Bill de Blasio's argument is that he's the candidate that provides the clearest break from Bloomberg, that's a very clear message that you don't need to spend a whole lot of money to sort of explain to people.
Right.
And people understand it. Christine Quinn, who's had to shift from being the Ray Kelly, Michael Bloomberg candidate to being the person who wants the men stop and frisk, her shift has been noticeable. And for
a lot of people, strategic.
There's a lot of different ways to explain it.
Go ahead.
But the idea that she's offering, in most respects, a continuation of what's currently happening in City Hall with a few modifications, is that going to be motivating to people to want to come out and vote? The argument that Bill de Blasio has put forward is the inequality gap in New York City has become intolerable. We need to change the way the police department is using proactive tactics like stop and frisk. That message...
And also the way the schools are educating the children, the lack of affordable housing. I mean, one of the things about Bill is that his message has been consistent and it's been targeted. But why is it breaking through now?
It's been consistent and it's been specific and it's been plausible and frankly, it's been limited. He's not talking, Bill de Blasio is not talking about really soaking the rich. He's talking about, for the upper tier of income earners, he's talking about moving their tax rates temporarily for 4 years, 4 or 5 years, by 0.5%. Now that's not, that's not
revolution.
That's not the French Revolution.
Right.
No.
It's not as extreme or as bold as some other people would have put it, but that idea has been put out for quite a while, and he floated it, frankly, when he was not considered a contender in the race. So a lot of people didn't pay attention to it. A lot of candidates didn't even spend time to attack it, and they just sort of dismissed it. And part of the reason is because he was down in the polls because there was Anthony Weiner's entrance into the race. Now when Anthony Weiner arrived, he is a national figure just by the virtue of his scandal, by the virtue of his resignation, by virtue of the fact that he's married to Huma Abedin, who is Hillary Clinton's top aide. Mm-hmm. He consumed so much oxygen in this race that when he had his second scandal in the race and sort of got knocked out, he became the second or third, depending on how you want to count it, he became the second or third anti-Bloomberg candidate in the race to sort of fall. So you had Bill de Blasio almost by default. You had John Liu, the city comptroller, who's had fundraising, had a fundraising scandal. 2 people associated with this campaign were found guilty in a federal trial, even though he himself had never been directly charged or accused of any wrongdoing. He never got out of the gate, really. You had Anthony Weiner jump in, consume all the oxygen, and they get knocked out. And who you have left standing is Bill de Blasio, who now people are looking at his pre-K plan and his plan to tax the rich, and there's questions about whether it's actually even feasible, are the numbers even there, will it even pass Albany, and what does he do as a backup plan? He really just says, trust me. So his argument has been clear, but his argument has not actually been, until the last couple of weeks, really been the focus of his critics.
Okay. Why all of a sudden he catapults? I mean, it was a huge jump. So yeah, it's got to be in part that his issues began to resonate because more folks were paying attention. But it's more than what else is it?
Well, it's interesting. I was interviewing him and I asked him, do you worry that maybe New York is not as liberal as you are? This is a city that's had a quarter of a century of Republican mayors. And,
sort of Republican.
Being rich is really not considered a sin in New York, or not. It's not a surprise. It's not a shock.
Right.
That people really just want to make a lot of money.
Right.
That's probably why at least 50% of the people who moved here did move here. So for De Blasio, I asked it to him, and he said, oh no, I'm out in the street, and people are really, really ready for change. Now, he may be right in this specific limited sense. The people who are likely to come out in the primary, there might be a lot of people who are seriously energetic and motivated, and they intend to come out because they agree with him that inequality is serious, that it needs to get dealt with. It needs to get dealt with firmly, using words like redistribution that have been taboo for the last 12 years.
Well, the whole two cities language is exactly.
Well, that's right. I mean, and some of the Bloomberg people have scoffed at him. They've said, oh, that works so well for John Edwards. Oh, that works so well for Freddie Ferrer.
Deputy Mayor Wolfson went after him directly after saying, he's a great friend, stuck the shiv in. I mean, clearly.
Yeah. Well, but that's an attempt at, I interpreted that as, gee, they must be a little bit worried.
Are you kidding me?
Maybe they have some internal
He's got to be
polls
speaking for the mayor. No, I mean, the mayor's paying him. I mean.
And he's doing a favor to Christine Quinn by knocking down her strongest opponent and saying the sort of things that she directly can't say, by saying that his policy on stop and frisk or the racial profiling bill will help send New York back to the 1970s. If you hear Christine Quinn's argument against supporting the racial profiling bill, she actually does not say that it will bring New York City back to the 1970s. She just fears the chaotic involvement of courts and what it means in terms of the direction of who's able to give orders to the police officers. But she explicitly does not say that it causes the kind of problems that City Hall says. But she has Howard Wolfson sort of making that argument to her strongest opponent.
So in a sense, the mayor's office is playing surrogate, but the mayor's out calling people trying to get him into the race. I mean, what?
Yeah, this is
Excuse
true.
me.
This is true. I don't know what this administration imagines is going to happen when they leave.
Okay.
But
après moi le déluge. Come on.
Right. Well, the other famous French quote, right, is it's usually attributed to de Gaulle, which is that the cemeteries are full of indispensable
people.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah. So the city's going to continue. The city's bigger than any one man, any one mayor, any one administration. They're not quite ready, I think, to acknowledge that, but what they've done over the last 12 years has been remarkable. And they should not kid themselves. There are a lot of people who like what they did with the schools, certainly with public safety, with transportation, with the environment. They've got a lot of fans. And I think they should maybe consider trying to let their accomplishments speak for themselves. Because, what's most interesting, I think, about this crop, especially on the Democratic side, is how much stuff they have not said they're going to change. Everybody says, inequality is a problem. The policing has to be sort of fine-tuned, but nobody is saying we don't want to plant 1 million trees. Nobody has said we're going to pull up the bike lanes. Nobody has said we're going to get rid of the solid waste management plan altogether.
Right.
There's this question about 91st Street.
Right.
But for the most part, this administration has baked in its accomplishments in a way that it's almost inconceivable that it could really get reversed, and that includes mayoral control.
Okay. Let's say there's no recount. Let's say that there's obviously a clear winner in the controller's race, but a clear first and second, but no 40% in the mayor's race. Who is likely to be in that top tier? I mean, there are 3 candidates. There's de Blasio, there's Quinn, and there's Thompson. The latest polls show de Blasio up there, and there's a gap between Quinn and Thompson, and they're bunched together. The polls are all over the place, and we'll talk about that in a bit, but they show that. What do you expect to happen on Wednesday?
Long before any of this, I always just assumed that Thompson was going to be in a runoff.
Yeah.
Because he ran last time. People have pulled the lever for Bill Thompson now 3 times in citywide elections, and he's always done respectably well. He's also always underperformed until the moment of truth. So I've always assumed that was going to happen. Who else gets into the runoff? Anybody's guess. Literally anybody's guess.
Really anybody's guess?
Anybody's guess. I mean, you can look at this point. I would.
It's a coin toss.
I would still say there's a case to be made for a late surge by an Anthony Weiner. It could still
Oh, of course it could. Oh, but this would be the best. I mean, from a sort of pontificator's analyst.
No, Doug. I
No?
mean, look,
Go
I
ahead.
think look, the election that people often compare this to is 1977. And if you go back and look at when, Bella Abzug
My first one,
and
yep.
Herman Badillo and, all of these folks, Cuomo and Koch and Percy Sutton were all running, they all finished within like 3 or 4 points of each
Yeah,
other.
and the top one was Koch with like 19.2.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Right.
so to me, it's conceivable at least that something like that could happen again. Now they have different fortunes, they have different polling numbers. You can explain the polling numbers, but
I can't, unfortunately.
They all have roughly the same amount of money.
Oh, well,
plus or minus
they
a couple
will.
of $1 million dollars.
Sure,
And
not
some are
even.
doing radio advertising, so they're not on television, but radio advertising, which John Lewis has been relying
Yes.
on, is a very tricky animal. I mean, I spent 2.5 years in radio. There's people listening at 6 o'clock in the morning that nobody else
My
knows is
mother-in-law
listening.
listened to you every morning.
God bless her. But he's on Russian. He's doing ads in Russian,
yep.
In Haitian Creole, on
Yep.
and on and on. He's been doing it for months.
And that gets to the point of John Liu and Anthony Weiner. Who are they pulling votes from? If we are to believe that they're not going to finish in the top 2 or 3, then you have to ask where is their support coming from? Now you can assume that John Liu is going to get a disproportionate number of Asian votes,
Right.
Who are coming out because he's the first Asian elected citywide. They're making history, and he's spoken to them directly in a way that no other candidate has.
Right.
The question is, where else is he drawing support from? Is he drawing African American votes from Bill Thompson's base? Is he drawing people who want a clear break from Michael Bloomberg, which have gravitated towards Bill de Blasio?
Sure.
Anthony Weiner. There's no one supporting Anthony Weiner that doesn't know about his problems. And those people who are supporting him now, you can guarantee are going to wake up and vote for him. Who would they have normally gone for? And,
Right.
and that question is an open-ended.
Right.
It's open-ended, and we're not fully going to know that answer until Wednesday or Thursday or Friday or
Right.
sometime later.
And it'd be nice if we had exit polls so we can actually figure out.
I think they are doing some this year.
Yeah, because that would be important, because otherwise you really don't know. You're totally speculating. Okay, so it's Billy Thompson and either Bill de Blasio and Chris Quinn. Do you agree with this?
Most likely.
Okay. Do you have a preference or a feeling between de Blasio and Quinn?
Preference, I just
No,
reported.
not preference.
Right, but who do I think is more likely?
Yes.
Listen, Quinn
back
has a smart ground game. If you listen to her people, if you listen to the argument, if you look at who's sort of working there, they've done some very smart moves. They've had some difficult challenges. Bill Thompson has notoriously run a campaign that is good but not bold. He hasn't really treaded out too far. He's sort of campaigned very safely.
They've all got huge advantages, and they're distinct advantages that don't really overlap.
Right.
So Bill de Blasio, as you've suggested, clearly the change candidate.
Right.
He's kind of staked out that position. He's benefited from the problems that some of the other candidates have had on the left side of the spectrum. Quinn is the establishment candidate. She's backed by all 3 newspapers, and the most powerful, the most powerful and richest person in the city, who happens to be the mayor, is in her corner. That's not a small advantage at all. If you think about the big data operation that they had 4 years ago,
Right.
Bloomberg's campaign's ability to target households,
But is that
they-
available to Quinn?
that's an open question. And
Yeah.
then Bill Thompson has the biggest union,
Right.
the most energetic union.
Yeah.
And again, he almost became mayor 4 years ago. So he's been down the track before. He
Okay.
knows about
Okay,
this.
so we've
He's got
got
seniors on his side.
We've got a runoff, and we've got presumably Joe Loder, if the smart money is correct. Who runs best against Loder, or who does Loder run best against? Who does Loder run least well against of the 3 major Dems?
Interesting question. Interesting.
I mean, can we have another Republican mayor? That's basically what I'm asking. How does Loder stack up against Quinn? How does Loder stack up against de Blasio? And how does he stack up against Thompson? And that's after a runoff where they've gutted one another.
Based on what Loda has said,
Go
and
ahead.
he has said it repeatedly in forum after forum, that the gains, especially the public safety gains that we've seen over the last 3 administrations, the last 3 terms, are fragile. That's his word, fragile, fragile, fragile. So if he wants to continue with that theme for the general election, maybe this is just being targeted for the Republican primary voters, but if he wants to make that his overall theme, then he wants to run against Bill de Blasio.
Right.
Because he clearly is signaling a break from the Bloomberg years. And if Joe Loda's case is that we don't want to lose the good parts of this administration or these last 12 years, stick with me and I'll see us through it.
But this is your mood of the city argument.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so who's the strongest, either Thompson or Quinn?
Well, I mean, if you're not fearful, then any of them are going to have a real solid case to make.
Right.
If the mood of the electorate, however, is, as Joe Lota says, that, oh my God, this could turn back into 1992.
Right.
Then
the bad old Dinkins.
Yeah, the bad old days. And I mean, look, I think there's an empirical question here. How many people have moved here? How many people even remember 1992?
Right.
Or were growing up. And most people who were growing up, they're like, whatever else was going on, my childhood was pretty happy.
That's exactly right. You have to be over 40 virtually.
And Joe Lota's biggest supporter, highest profile supporter, is Rudy Giuliani. And you can imagine if it's a Bill Thompson, Joe Lota race, that one side or the other is going to highlight Giuliani, whether or not Lota wants that to be known or not.
It's gotta happen.
If it's a Christine Quinn Joe Lota race, you're going to have people writing endlessly about how it's. I think Chris Smith sort of coined this, how it's Bloomberg's fourth term versus Rudy Giuliani's third term.
Yeah.
So you have all these kind of fascinating, larger narratives with their supporters just waiting in the wings.
What about controller? I mean, that's clear cut. Somebody's going to walk away a winner next Tuesday night, even with the Board of Elections and the machines.
Two men answer, one man leaves.
Yeah, that's right. So, Lota wins.
You'll have to guide me through this with your polling knowledge, because we've seen the numbers all over the place.
Yep.
I mean, the
polls are exclamation point, ampersand, number sign. There's a lot of cursing going on.
The majority of the polls, I mean, the two or three of and I'm just talking about Marist, Quinnipiac, and Siena.
Go ahead.
Two out of the three that I've looked at most closely have Spitzer with a large lead, and that's not surprising. At least it wasn't surprising at first.
Right.
This is a guy who got 70% of the statewide vote. He's been, he's enormously known, enormously
CNN.
known. Been on television for a few years, right? So that wasn't surprising. On the other hand, most of those soundings were taken before all of the dailies.
Right.
Not just endorsed Stringer, but attacked the notion.
Oh
of
God,
Spitzer.
they said horrible things.
Yeah.
But Spitzer has run some of the best ads.
Yeah.
I mean, he has Jimmy Siegel, who's one of the best ad people in the game.
The air war's going to Spitzer.
But the polling in that race has been sort of all over the map, just to put it mildly. So Quinnipiac has done 3 polls of likely Democratic voters, and the number to watch in polling about Spitzer is 50%.
Yep.
He's the best known candidate in the race, so he's basically like the incumbent.
Yep.
So if he's going into an election with less than 50% support, that means a majority of people are either supporting Stringer or don't know enough about Stringer to identify him, but they're clearly saying, we know this other guy, we're not going to vote for him. So if he's below 50, the chances are he's going to lose. In Quinnipiac's 3 polls of likely Democratic voters, he's been below 50% in 2 of them. The latest one had them each at 46%.
That is his problem, right? You've got to assume if you have total name recognition, anybody who's undecided going into the final hours of the election,
you might assume they'll go the other way.
You have to assume they're going to go the other way.
Yeah, but if he's got that big a lead now, we don't know what those numbers really mean. Can't that hold up?
No, the quote unquote lead he had was in the second poll where he was at, I think, like 56%.
Right.
Which is great, because it's above 50. What happened in that second poll was that they had increased Quinnipiac had said the number of likely Democratic voters who are black that are going to show up is 35%, meaning Spitzer's lead in that category was amplified because that group was going to be bigger.
Yeah.
In their latest poll that had him at 46%, that group shrunk. Now you can
it's the modeling.
It's the modeling.
Depending on what model you use of likely voters and what the electorate looks at, you come up with different results. That's why the polls are making me crazy.
And this is where it turns into sort of a matrix.
Go ahead.
Because it's hard to imagine, even though a lot of black officials are in this position, there are a lot of black officials who are supporting Bill Thompson and supporting Scott Stringer.
Right.
The thing is, you pull the voter out, you've got to ask them to do what the polls are suggesting they don't want to do.
Right.
So if you're pulling out people to vote for Bill Thompson, and you're also asking them not to vote for Elliot Spitzer, they may not do that once they get inside the voting booth.
Right.
And that's where all of this turns into like a gigantic guessing game, because that first question we were asking, who's going to have the best ground game?
Right.
Well, once they pull them out for the top line vote, what are they going to do while they're in the voting?
Sure, exactly.
I mean, the idea of the coattail effects is I think just a fascinating question, because you're going to have a guy at the top of the ticket Bill Thompson, who's running, and then in Brooklyn, you have a district attorney candidate whose last name
Ken Thompson.
is Thompson.
Yeah.
So you have all sorts of situations where candidates are going to see people's names on a ballot, and they're not going to do what as many people expect them to do.
That happens all the
I
time.
tell you, the big X factor that nobody has been able to figure out is where the Latino vote is going to go.
Exactly.
No prominent Latino.
No, except
candidate.
Carry On's out there, but I don't think he's resonating.
On the Independence Party line.
Yeah.
So he's not really a
We'll
direct
see him
factor.
in November.
Right. Yeah, right. That would be a November fact. Role of independent expenditures. I mean, we sort of mentioned it. A lot of money. A lot of money.
A lot of money. I tend to think of this as a turning point.
I
Because
do.
I don't think I've ever seen this.
This has been remarkable, and the Campaign Finance Board has done an amazing job of issuing these charts that show how much each candidate is spending and how much outside groups are spending on their behalf and also against them. And if you look at these charts, you have a fascinating look at who a very small group of people are spending a whole lot of money to elect, primarily in the city council, which controls land use issues and tangentially has an effect on the business climate in the city.
The group called Jobs for New York. It's mostly sponsored by the real estate industry. They've made the biggest contributions. And they have embarked on a remarkable campaign going to district after district, spreading more negative mail than I have ever seen in one election. I've been watching this stuff for a long time.
I know, it was really, and then you've got the anti-Chris Quinn stuff. Do you know anybody but Quinn ads? I think they had an impact. I mean, they spent $750,000,
Yeah.
you know,
They
TV ads and demonstrations.
They were the first concerted shot across her bow before Bill de Blasio took off. They were the first ones who were taking a swing at her. But those mailers that Errol's talking about are phenomenal. And if
I've seen them. They're horrible.
If they're kept for historical purposes and people are able to look back on it, New York City is really going to wonder how this giant loophole was allowed to happen, where candidates were tarred and feathered basically in mailboxes without an ability to respond, because the amount of money that this outside group is spending sometimes dwarfs what the candidates are actually spending.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we'll have to come back and look at what happened in those council races, because in some ways, I think you're right, Errol, this is really one of those not quite well reported stories that this is out there.
Well, I think what's happening is because this tide of negative mailing, and by negative, I don't want people to get the wrong impression. It's not just a matter of saying, you know, this is a bad candidate. They're publishing information saying so-and-so hasn't paid their taxes. They've got personal tax liens, or you know, so-and-so hasn't paid their child support.
Almost.
Scurrilous
Oh,
stuff.
okay. Well, let's stop with the scurrilous.
And although it's put out by this group, Jobs for New York, it says nothing about jobs. It says nothing about any issue at all. And the effect that it has had is not simply that. I mean, look, there's one theory that I read a long time ago, and I think it's probably true, is that the point of negative mail is to drive down people's turnout. To get them just so disgusted with the whole process that they don't vote. And to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions, frankly, you know, in that direction is not something that I think is healthy. And, you know, we don't want to curb anybody's speech, but we should be aware of what's going on.
Okay, we have to stop there. My thanks to friends and colleagues, Errol Louis and Azi Paybarah, and their help in separating the wheat from the chaff. Thank you, sir. Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.